Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. This time we're here at Barber Motorsports Park, I think it's called, for the first iRacing IndyCar Series track guide. Obviously it was meant to align with the real IndyCar schedule, but with all motorsports cancelled right now, we're instead going to have the iRacing IndyCar Challenge from Barber next week. But for those of you who are interested in this track, hopefully I can give you a little bit more of a breakdown on how the car drives and how the new aero screen is going to work. Obviously the first track guide with the aero screen. But yeah, just a reminder, if you don't already know, everything I'm doing is using Pure Driving School setups and weather. So if you are a Pure Driving School member, you can go to their website, download the setup, launch a session using the weather settings that are also listed right below in the description, and try and set a lap and beat my time. So yeah, hopefully the guide helps you, but let's go ahead and look at the lap. It was a 107.3. I don't remember the exact time, but we'll talk a bit more about the lap once we've looked at it. So yeah. So yeah guys, there was the lap. That was a 107.323. I think I set this on my third or fourth lap of the run. Had 61 liters left in the tank, so maybe just 3 or 4 laps into the run. So my optimal was a 107.0, so there is still a bit more time on the table. But putting a lap together here is a bit tougher than I thought when I first came into practicing this week. It's a really fun track, short track. So let's get straight into it. Obviously, we've got a short run down pit straight, very short. But then once we get to the one board, actually a little bit before, you can see as I approach the 100-meter board, getting on the brakes, getting to about 50% brake pressure here. I'm going to rewind it a little bit because I wanted to show you, I did not take this perfectly. I actually slid the car a little bit. And if we switch to an onboard shot right now, you'll see as the rear starts to step around, I have to straighten out the steering. Oh wait, no, I need to go back to the actual lap, so let's quickly do that. You'll see, as we get here, I think I turned in at about the right point. But what happens is, I seem to get a little bit too much turn, and so I straightened the wheel, but because I have too much turn, I hit the curb a little bit too hard. You can kind of touch the curb and get away with it, but not the ideal situation. It doesn't affect the corner too much, and it actually didn't compromise turn 2 that much. So turn 2 now at right-hand hairpin, so obviously you want to get over to the left-hand side of the track as quickly as possible. But the first thing you'll note is a distinct lack of any type of braking markers, and so you have to try and find your braking point. But what I use the exit of the pit lane merge as kind of my reference. I brake a little bit before that, but when I'm in the car and when I see that in my peripheral vision, that's when I get onto the brakes. So again, onto the brakes here, you're not braking as hard into these corners as you will a little later in the lap, but you definitely want to keep the brakes to trail the car around. And you can see, I'm going to get on the power nice and early here. And I'm straight up to almost 80% throttle, and you know, I'm slowly getting more and more throttle there, turning the car. And you've got a slightly short straight here, and it's very important to get a good run. And I go all the way to this exit curb here. You don't lose too much the car doesn't bounce and lose any speed or anything. But what you do need to avoid is what happens here. I clipped this curb a little too much, and you can see, if we ride on board for a second, you can see it a bit better. You can see just how much that actually upsets the car. It's I don't know how much time it really cost me in this situation, but it's not ideal, and so you kind of want to try and avoid that. So now we come down to one of the two hardest corners on the track, in my opinion. This one is called Charlotte's Web, and it's your biggest braking point. So you can see at this 200-meter board, right before actually, there's this green light that you can maybe use, or even this, if we go back a little bit further, you can maybe use this Marshall stand as a braking reference. So this Marshall stand right here, because you can see I lift off the throttle right around that Marshall stand, and I'm hard on the brakes as we get down to the 200-meter board. Now, this braking zone is very bumpy. The bumpiest part is kind of in between these two braking boards, and so this part of the braking zone is potentially the most dangerous. It's where you need to get the majority of the braking done, because as you get closer to the turn-in point here, you're obviously going to want to start trailing off the brakes so you can start turning in. But the corner here is slightly different. It's kind of this weird double, triple apex kind of thing. And so as we keep going, you'll see I'm braking at 90% brake pressure here. This is one of the hardest braking zones on the track, maintaining that for quite a while actually, almost until we get to this white curb. And you'll see I'm slowly going down the gears, now in second. And again, I like to use the engine braking. I know Henry, my teammate, for example, who does the pure driving school setups, does not use engine braking as much. You'll see as we turn in here, down in first gear, still slowly on the brakes, and you're going to see I'm actually going to trail the brakes quite a bit as we get to the midway point of this corner. So this is kind of your first apex zone, and I kind of miss it, but I don't really think I've been hitting it that consistently anyway. You can kind of ignore it and focus a little bit more on the exit. And so you'll see I'm still waiting. I think I'm still sometimes trailing. Oh, here we go. So we're going to have to go a little bit back. But as we came around this part is where the first main apex is. I say main apex is because where you get on the power. So you'll see I'll get on the power, and I'm going to get on the power quite progressively. And so if you look from the cockpit view right now, you'll see you're basically 90 degrees from where you were, and you've still got another 90 degrees to go. And you're going to do most of the turning now on the throttle. So again, going slowly. I actually got on the power a little bit early, and in this case it didn't harm me too much. Now it does drive me a bit wide from where the ideal second apex would be, which would be a much tighter line that kind of goes more, it sticks a little closer to this edge of the track on the left side. Instead, what happens to me is I go a little bit wider because I got on the power a bit earlier, the rear is a bit looser, and I get a little bit of oversteer, again, not costing me too much time. But the part that loses me more time is that I'm now taking all this extra track. So it's very important, you can maybe delay your throttle application a little bit more, but stick as far to the left-hand side of the track as you can. So there's quite a bit of deviation that I have to take coming out of Charlotte's Web down into Museum Corner. Now, Museum Corner is where I struggled the most with this setup. I just couldn't get consistent with it. What you're going to do, though, is you're going to try and slowly bleed off some of your speed on the entry to this corner. So this is a very interesting corner because you have an initial right-hand entry, but then you have this downhill, bumpy right-hand hairpin almost, and you're bouncing the car a lot, and you're going to lock the brakes on both sides of the front wheel, and that's nothing you can do about that. That's just because the car is bouncing in the air. So you'll see, braking fairly hard, but I trail it off pretty quickly. And I don't want to try and scrub too much momentum before we get to this corner. So actually, you might be able to get away with turning in slightly later. I turn in fairly early, and I'm aligned with this curve, which is where you do want to be. But more important is you can see that I have align myself perfectly, so I'm going to get basically 2 wheels on the edge of the curb here, and hopefully 2 wheels on the outside of this white line. If you get both, if you get all the car on this curb, it can sometimes unsettle it a bit too much, and you go a bit deep and lose time. So important to not try and attack the corner too much. Now it is hard to set this up, so especially now with the vents, in my opinion, blocking some of that view becomes a little bit tougher, and so just picking out your turn-in zone is important. You'll see you can see the edge, or at least I can see the edge of the curb right about there, and I think that's where I use as a reference point to start straightening the steering. And so as you come over the curb, you're going to start braking for the second time. You're going to definitely apply a little bit more brake. I'm letting the car roll. I'm not sure if that is the ideal line, but hard on the brakes, down the gears, and you'll see just how much of the curb is fairly high, so you bounce quite a lot. But you don't tend to lock the left front as much as you lock the right front, which we're going to switch to the cockpit view right now. And you see, as you go through this downhill, I get a little bit too much understeer. Now maybe that's because I'm carrying a little bit too much entry speed. But you can also see just how much that front tire was locked right there. It's because the front tire will be in the air, sometimes you'll just push a little too deep. And so remember, you're going to want to try and maybe set up the entry a bit more so you don't lose as much time on the exit. But on exit anyway, it's fairly simple. Get on power as progressively as you can and as early as you can, not trying to use too much of the track. Now again, here you got a little bit of S's. I've seen some people not run as wide as I do, but what I've found is that, especially on cold tires, you kind of want this wider line, because with a shallower line, I tended to find it was a little bit too, on cold tires, you just wouldn't make the corner. It would understeer a little bit too much. But now we head towards the fastest part of the track. You're going to lift a little bit as you come past the 100-meter board down into this left-hand blind kink. It really is blind, so we'll quickly just look at the onboard cam. So you kind of have to judge your turn-in zone from your lifting reference. So maybe you're going to lift around here. Maybe you lift around the Marshall post that's a little bit off to the right. You need to turn the car in fairly early, and you want to try and get as close to the curb as you can without touching the curb. You'll notice I get a little bit too far to the right-hand side. And this is where you're going to start braking. You're going to go from carrying some throttle still and trying to carry your momentum to slowing for this next right-hand section. Now, this right-hander is very tricky because of the way you crest over a hill. And the car gets extremely light. But what makes it lighter is if you do the mistake that I did here, and because I missed the apex in the previous corner, I'm slightly offline, and I'm going to touch this curbing over here, and that just unsettles the car even more. You want to try and avoid this, okay? I got away with it, but you'll see just how hesitant I have to be on the throttle. I'm waiting. I go a little bit down. I'm trying to get confidence in the car, and touching that curb just removes some of the confidence that you have in the car. And this is a corner where you need the confidence to really attack it, and so the more you can do to mitigate that, the better. So avoid that curb at all costs. Now we get to the final three corners of the track. This first right-hand, it's a long sweeping right-hander that kind of bleeds into a second one. Now you want to try and get as close to the inside of this corner as possible, but you'll see that I start to lift. And that's because I'm trying to stick as tight as I can. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work. One issue with this setup that I found is that, especially going through this second to last corner, the rear end has a tendency to feel a bit light and sometimes snap on you. And so what I think I felt in this situation, you can see just how little I'm loading the steering. I think I felt the car being a bit too light. And so I run the car a bit wider than normal, and that definitely compromised what I do here. So you can see I'm turning in, and now I'm getting understeer. So I've compromised myself so much before, and now I'm compromising again. You want to try and get closer, but attack on throttle as much as you can, up to 100% there. And because I'm a little bit too much on the left-hand side, I have to bleed back to like 10% throttle for a little bit of the time. But with the diff setting as it's currently at, you should be able to, if you're a little bit more to the edge of the track on turn-in, so maybe if you're around, I'm almost a full car width, right? So you could still potentially go a little bit further. And so a little bit more time could be gained in that little section there. But yeah, so that was the lap. Hopefully that was somewhat helpful for you guys. Like I said, it was a 107, I think 323. Now the biggest difference we have with the new aero screen, it actually doesn't affect road courses that much. You have to obviously balance for the increased weight that you now have. And obviously the weight is a little bit higher, but in terms of the car feel, it doesn't really behave or perform too much differently as long as you adjust your setup to compensate for it. Now, that doesn't mean that you're as fast as you were before. In fact, I'd argue you're anywhere between half a second and a second slower, depending on the track you're at. At the Nordschleife next week, I'm betting that it's going to be considerably more than a second, the delta from having the aero screen. But on the road side, it doesn't handle that differently at all. So I think for a lot of people as well, who complained about the AFP being very intrusive in a single monitor situation, the bar in the middle now being much thinner should alleviate a lot of those concerns. And I mean, you don't really see any of the aero screen, the top part of it, because in the IndyCar it is so tall compared to what it is in F1. The halo in F1 is much lower. So not really too much impact. The main impact, I think, is more that we now have to go and get all of our paints upgraded. I'm going to have to do that, and maybe we can do some nice little patterns around the top of the halo there. Yeah, I hope that was helpful for you guys. If you liked the video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and a like on YouTube, where it will be after I'm done recording on Twitch. If you're not already following me on Twitch, go ahead and do that as well. A link will be in the description below. It's where I do most of my racing, so if you enjoy watching IndyCar racing, maybe you think there's going to be some good racing at Barber. I promise that I'm going to be doing quite a few races at Barber next week. So yeah, go ahead, like, subscribe, follow on Twitch. And if you have any feedback about what I can do better in the videos, please do comment below. And if you set a lap time and you beat me, go ahead and comment below as well, and I can go ahead and congratulate you. But for now, that's it. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.